Hey everyone, it's Karnak here of Star Wars Armada Explained. Thanks for joining me. Guys, some mistakes were made. I need to recover surprise attack. I didn't cover the interaction with the SSD with this objective very well, but also I kind of found a way to break the objective and break the game. And at the end of the video, swears, you're all going to make me a promise that you're not going to break the game. Please don't break the game. Alright, let's get back into recovering this objective. I've got the text up there in the corner. I know it's small and hard to read. If you want to follow along with me better, you can always go to the Star Wars Armada wiki and pull up that objective card from there. You can read it better. Because I'm going to keep it small because I'm going to be doing stuff as I'm reading along. So the second player places the station at distance 1 to 5 of the first player's edge, then place the remaining obstacles as normal. That's the first part of the setup. So when it's saying at distance 1 to 5 of the first player's edge, I want to clarify that it means the first player's edge in the setup area, which is in between these two vertical lines. The whole playmat is the play area, but you can't, for example, take the station and set it up out here, for example. Move these out of the way. You wouldn't be able to set it up out here. I've had a player already try to argue that, oh, it just says at distance 1 to 5. That's distance 1 to 5 outside of the player's edge. Well, first off, that's outside of the setup area. Another thing, ships can't deploy outside of the setup area. So, no, you cannot do that. That is incorrect. You cannot place the station out there. It says in the rule book that all obstacles must be placed in the setup area. And of course, if there's any objective that ever specifically spells it out otherwise, do what the objective says. But in this situation, no. Bad. Don't do this. Don't try to argue this point. All right. I'm going to set up the Star Destroyer here to guys give you an idea of where that distance is. So the Star Destroyer here, so distance, you've got the distance 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when it's saying distance 1 to 5 off the player's edge, it's meaning pretty much you can place the station anywhere in the first player's deployment area, distance 1 to 5. But also remember, it also says at distance 1 to 5, meaning you could take the station and place it something like this. This is at distance 5. It's still touching that distance 5 range band. So you can place the station in such a manner. Then you replace the remaining obstacles as normal, which is just the rest of the regular obstacles. Which again, those can be deployed as normal, which is beyond distance 3 of both sides and beyond distance 1 of each other. Perfect. While deploying fleets, the first player must deploy their flagship before deploying any other ships. Their flagship must overlap the station, even if the flagship extends beyond the deployment zone. The first player cannot deploy any ship at a speed greater than half of the ship's maximum speed, rounded up. What does this mean? It means the ship that your commander is equipped to, in this case I'm going to say this ISD, has to deploy on the station. It must be overlapping the station. That's what it says. Now, when doing this overlap, it does give you the exception of you can deploy beyond, out of your normal deployment zone to be able to overlap the station. Now, when it says the overlapping part, I want to remind everyone that shield dials still count as part of the ship for overlapping. It specifically states that in the rulebook, meaning that something like this is technically allowed because the ship is technically overlapping that station with the shield dial, because again, shield dials count for overlapping. Also means you can do some crazy shenaniganery, something like that, if you wanted to put your flagship way out where it can get exploded, I guess, but you could do this. This also, or before I get on to the second part, let's talk about, again, you cannot deploy at a speed greater than half of your ship's maximum speed, rounded up. Meaning if you're a ship that can go speed 3 or speed 4, the max speed you can go with speed 2. If you go speed 2, the max speed you can go with speed 1 on your deployment. Obviously, after deployment, you can use other effects to speed up your ship when it activates. Okay. I'll get into some of the other stuff. I'm going to finish reading the rest of this card. After deploying fleets, the second player places 3 face-down command dials in a stack on this card. Special rule. At the start of the ship phase during the first, second, and third rounds, the second player reveals the top command on this card, and each of the first player's ships gains a raid token during that dial. Now, the wording on that is a little fuzzy because it just says take 3 face down command dials, just place 3 face down command dials on a stack on this card. Okay, it should say, and I'm telling you this is what it should say because I understand the developer's intent. I just don't know why that wording wasn't communicated on here better. Is after deploying fleets, the second player sets and places 3 command dials in a stack face down on this card. That's pretty much how it should be worded because it's the second player who's choosing the commands on those command dials. You're not just picking up 3 random command dials, throwing them in a stack, and then throwing them on the card. It's not random. The second player is deciding what those commands are. And then at the start of the first, second, and third rounds, that player then takes the first, just like with a ship, he's taking those commands off at the start of each round and revealing them. And any ship, whatever command is revealed, all the ships gain a raid token matching that command. Now, what does raid do? I'll cover raid again. So raid is if you have a raid token on a ship, you cannot resolve that command until the raid is cleared. How can you clear it? There's 2 ways right now. The first and simplest way, do you have a matching command token for that raid token? You can take that command token, chuck it, that clears the matching raid command token. Okay, so 1 for 1, but only for the one that it's for. The second way to clear raid is when you reveal your command dial, you can discard the dial and clear all raid tokens on your ships. Okay, so that is the only 2 ways right now you can clear raid. So the raid is kind of helping to punish, it's a surprise attack. Like, surprise, your flagship's out of position. We're raiding all your ships. So with smart preparation and counterplay, you can get around the negative effects of surprise attack, the raid part. But if you're not prepared for it, raid, if you've got heavy squadrons, what do you think your opponent's going to do for the first 3 turns? He's going to raid all your ships with squadrons, so you can't do squadrons. But you can always, for example, bank a squadron token, and then when you go to start your next turn, when you reveal your next squadron dial, take that squadron token, clear that raid squadron token, and then resolve the raid dial, So anyway, that is that part there. Now let's talk about some things about this overlapping and deployment. So I do want to point out that with, for example, this ISD, you can still deploy fighters at distance 1 to 2 from the Star Destroyer in this manner. You can deploy squadrons exactly like this because they are at distance 1 to 2 from your ship, because that's all it says in the rulebook, is saying that squadrons can deploy distance 1 to 2 off of any ship you have on the board. So any small, medium, and large ship can deploy squadrons distance 2 off of it. That's totally fine. That's allowed. You can do that. So you could, if you want to throw your fighters out there right away where they're going to get snacked on, you could do that. Although you could make an argument that a Squall-based Quasar-Fire sitting here on the back line with boosted comms, you may want to put squadrons out here so that they can get activated and they can potentially go alpha as well. Lots of variety here still for the first player, that even though it could be a disadvantage, maybe you can work this objective to your advantage. Depending on if your opponent makes mistakes or not. All right, let's talk about another unique thing of this objective. I want to make sure I'm pointing out. That's with the new Raider Tyval, the Corvus. So if you did have a Raider flagship and it got deployed on the station, and poor little Raider, he's going to get exploded. He's just a Raider, So, but Corvus is a new Raider title. It's 2 points. It says, after deploying fleets, you may redeploy the ship within your deployment zone. So Corvus allows the Raider to redeploy. So even though it's got your commander on it and it's stuck, if your Raider happens to have your commander on it with the Corvus tile and it got stuck on the station, because it's the first deployment you do, you're forced to do that. Everyone else deploys everything else, and then after deployment, you just take your flagship and go, nope, and you pull it and you yoink it back. You could also, put that Corvus out there, pop fighters off of it, and then you can redeploy it back into your deployment zone too. I mean, lots of cool play with the Corvus title. Now let's talk about the Superstar Destroyer. In my last video, this is kind of where I got a lot of things right, but I got a few things wrong, and this is also where I found something kind of game-breaking. So the SSD, it has two special rules. The first is, or there's several special rules. The first, it must deploy touching the first player's edge. The second is that it cannot overlap any obstacles during deployment, except in this situation where the objective is specifically stating that it must be overlapping the station. And the third is that squadrons cannot deploy past distance 5 off the SSD. It can deploy past any other ship the SSD, any other ship in the fleet that's not the SSD, but for the SSD itself, squadrons cannot deploy past distance 5. Period. That's a hard rule, meaning that for the SSD, you can't do something like this. This was the mistake I made in my last video because I thought that the objective of just needing to overlap the station overrode the previous rule. That's not the case. I've had a lot of further discussion with, as I always say, with other TOs, making sure I'm trying to get all this stuff right before I do videos. And then this was just kind of like, no, actually, you kind of did that wrong. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. So always try to make sure I'm getting things right, but sometimes I get things wrong. So the SSD can't do something like this. It has to deploy touching the edge and overlapping the station, and even though it's doing that, it cannot still then place fighters out at distance 2. Can't do that. Okay. I think I've covered that. Now, for this, a player could, they wanted to like put the station here. They could try to put an obstacle like off to the side. It forces you to dictate where that ship is going to deploy on the station. So here's where the game-breaking aspect of this is. And I had my initial thoughts about this was possible, but then I didn't really do 100% of my research. And then I spent, when I was making the new video, conferring other people, and I found this the other day. It took me about 10 minutes, but you can do this. So if you take the station and you rotate it to get it more, here we go, more flat up against the edge here at distance 5, and you take this rock and you put this rock and rotate it and do something kind of like this, because that's still at distance 1, you're beyond distance 1, you're going to see that this Superstar Destroyer I can't deploy on the station without overlapping that obstacle. I can't deploy over here without overlapping the obstacle. I can't even angle the SSD. Oop, Vassal's chugging a little bit. I can't even angle the SSD to touch the station with that rock in the way. Not possible. Can't do it. This is game breaking. This is what we call game breaking state. What this means is that the devs need to address this, because there is no official answer to this game-breaking state. If your SSD is your flagship, it has the hard rules. It must touch the first player's edge on deployment. It can't overlap other obstacles. This is a game-breaking state. Now, you could say, oh, just don't be dumb. Don't put things there. The issue is that some people are going to find out about this. Some people aren't. And then the second player, if the first player doesn't choose that rock first thing and puts it someplace else, the second player can grab that rock, stick it right there. Now your SSD can't deploy, and then that's a game-breaking state that is an illegal game state that is not the first player's fault. This is different than something like Fleet Ambush, where in Fleet Ambush, if the first player is helping the second player put objectives in the Fleet Ambush zone to where he can't deploy ships in there, that's the first player's fault. He made the conscious decision to throw objectives in his deployment area for Fleet Ambush. This is different. This is something that can be abused with second player having knowledge and first player not having knowledge. So this is what the community TOs we've decided, is that if for any reason, and this is a personal ruling, it's not official, if for any reason the SSD cannot deploy touching the first player's edge and touching the station without overlapping an obstacle, the less game-breaking state we can come up with is that it can overlap any obstacle in its way. Now, the SSD should make every effort and attempt to overlap the station without overlapping any obstacles. Meaning, for example, if somebody had placed the obstacle kind of like this, then that SSD has to deploy trying to reach the station to the best of its ability. Something like that. There we go. See, something like that. So that's just limiting your first player options. It's not completely stopping you. That's acceptable. But if for any reason the SSD cannot deploy on the obstacle or on the station and there's an obstacle in the way, it gets to deploy on the obstacle too. Because that's the least game-breaking state we can come up with until it gets fixed or addressed. Or they make a clarification saying that they're going to allow what we're saying it can be allowed for. So that's surprise attack. There's no other crazy interactions that we're aware of, for right now. This was only discovered just the other day, after all. But that surprise attack, I think it's a fantastic objective. I think it's really going to be a huge replacement for like Most Wanted. A lot of people have been saying how much they prefer this objective over something like Most Wanted. So you're still going to see this game. You still see this in play a lot. It's still a lot of fun. Don't be afraid of taking this objective. Because even again as first player, with the other tools you have at disposal, you can still capitalize on this objective, I feel. All right. Well, of course, if you feel like I got anything wrong or if I missed anything, please be sure to point it out. Let me know. Otherwise, hey, I'll catch you guys all later. Or next time. That's what I usually say. All right. Bye.